Good, good.
Yeah.
Okay then. Perfect. So, I think before we go any further, I would like to give the conversation context. Personally, I've done quite some research. Talked to young people and people from with different views about Pan Africanism and Borderless Africa as it is. And I decided to, frame my questions from those people that I've talked to. I've talked to guys in the diaspora. I've talked to young people, part of different movements. I've talked to people who don't believe in Pan Africanism, but also talked to people who have once believed, got frustrated, but even those that are really fired up. So my questions will come from that. Before we go any further, Hadi, for those that do not know you, I know you, and many Africans do know you, but for those that don't know you, who is Hardi Yakubu? Just to give us a brief introduction of who you are and how we ended up here talking to you as the coordinator of the biggest Pan African movement in the world. Just talk to us about who Hardi is. Karibu.
Yeah. Fred, thank you very much. I I don't like talking about myself so much because I think there's so much more that we always have to concentrate on in terms of the subject of liberation and unification. But yeah, my name is Hadi Yakubu, based in Ghana. Um, and as you said, in terms of what I believe in the need for Africa to be totally liberated and united, or united and liberated, as a matter of cause and effect. And currently, my work is around contributing what I can to achieving that vision. Um, and as you've mentioned, in doing that, I'm making my contribution as coordinator of Africans Rising, a Pan African movement, and yeah, I think that is where our paths crossed, and here we are talking about Pan Africanism. I must say, I'm always excited to have a conversation with fellow young people about Pan Africanism because people have this wrong perception that when you talk about Pan Africanism, liberation, and about old stuff, um, dealing with a subject that is really the future, and those who have vision have already seen it, and those who are against that are already doing everything they can to make sure it doesn't happen, like they did in years past. And those who are for it are looking forward to seeing the glory days where Africa is united under the banner of Pan African. Yeah, happy to be here. I think um, uh, it's a great conversation. We are not many, but it's always good to have a starting point. Um, and really, it doesn't take too many people to start a revolution. And yeah, Algerian revolution was started by 6 people in in a small conclave. So that is still okay. So yeah, thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Good. Thank you, Hadi. Um, Talking about Pan Africanism, I think we can start our conversation from there. In your personal opinion, as you, Comrade Hadi, what's your earliest interaction with Pan Africanism, and how has the journey been since then? And how would you describe to an African right now who probably has heard about Pan-Africanism and doesn't really know what it means. They do not consider themselves Pan-African. How would you describe to them what Pan-Africanism really is? And how would you tell them your journey has been as a Pan-African since you first interacted with it?
Yeah, I think my journey has been one of continuous learning, continuous organizing, continuous mobilizing, um, and studying with colleagues, having discussions, disagreements, debates, arguments, um, planning on what to do next based on the history. And there's a lot of history. And so, yeah, so my journey has been characterized in Pan Africanism, has been characterized by these things. With, when in 2018 we organized the Free Stella protest in Accra to demand for the freedom of Stella Nyanzi, who was being who had been detained by the security forces of Uganda. It was in furtherance of Pan Africanism when we organized in Accra to mobilize solidarity materials and relief items for people in Sierra Leone when the mudslides happened in 2000, again in 2018. That was, in furtherance of Pan-Africanism. When we marched in the streets of Accra, calling for the Janjaweed, to the army that cut short the People's Revolution in Sudan, to immediately, make sure that the revolutionaries reclaimed their revolution. It was in furtherance of Pan-Africanism. And so my journey has been characterized by a few things. First is, as I said, learning. Second is organizing, because Kwame Nkrumah said that organization decides everything. It has been about, mass actions. We don't always achieve our aims with a particular action, but at least it gives us the hope that we retain the capability at any point in time to be able to raise our voices and to come together for our common good. In terms of what Pan Africanism is, I think different people, from my experience, have had different, differences in terms of what they understand by Pan Africanism. I subscribe to a definition that was given by Kwame Nkrumah, and I'm a bona fide student of Kwame Nkrumah, the late first president of Ghana, whose definition says that Pan Africanism is the total liberation and unification of Africa. Total liberation and unification of Africa. So, for a layman who doesn't have an understanding of Pan Africanism, I think that is what I would start to tell them that Pan Africanism is. It is basically the liberation and total liberation and unification of Africa.
Great, thank you, Hardy. You talk about the Osage for Kwame Nkrumah's definition. But one of
Yeah.
the things I actually first, just like you, is when I was talking to people about Pan Africanism, asking them, many would tell you it depends on on how you define it. And I realized that people don't have a common understanding of Pan-Africanism, which then makes it hard, especially for young people today, to subscribe to it or to understand. Because it's one thing to believe in something, but it's better to understand what you believe in clearly. And I'd like you to take us through the evolution and how Pan Africanism has transitioned since. Because I read from when I read Kwame Nkrumah's book, he says Pan Africanism started in the 12th century by Black Americans in the diaspora. But ever since then, it looks like definitions have evolved over time. How would you take us through the evolution of how it has evolved over time, and really what is the practicability of Pan-Africanism? If I believe I'm Pan-African, how do I, what's the practical bit of it? Because people, most of them also think it's just theory and Africans believing in unity and being powerful, but they don't see the practicability of it. um, Share with us your thoughts in that regard.
Yeah. So it's a very complex history, but one that can be simplified um, when we look at uh, it from the perspective of African solidarity with one another in terms of where we were. Um, so it is possible to consider the um, where Africa has come from, and we can start from any point in history, whether we are looking at um, the ancient civilizations. Talk about Nubia. You can talk about Kemet. You can talk about um, those that came after. In terms of Mali, in terms of Songhai, in terms of Ghana Empire, and you can talk about the sort of disruption of the historical evolution of Africa's development. And that is where you're looking at the slavery, the period of slavery, and then colonialism and all of those. Yeah. But if we fast forward to the one of the key points in history, I mean, slavery, colonialism, and all of these are backgrounds, are critical backgrounds to the need for African unification and Pan-Africanism, which is because division and lack of unity has caused us all this history. And I will refer us to 1884, 85, what we call the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference was a conference that was called by Europeans, specifically von Bismarck of Germany, who called his European counterparts to sit around a table in Berlin, took the map of Africa apart, and drew parts of the continent for themselves, for trade purposes, and also to prevent conflicts amongst themselves, as they were beginning to see in terms of maritime trade and things like that. So that division is very much the antecedent of what we have now today in Africa as different countries with their different borders. And all those borders artificially drawn by people who had no idea about the people who were living in Africa, how they lived, and so this is sort of the background. 1900 in 1900, a man called Sylvester Williams then formed the African Association in London, and through the African Association, then called a Pan African Conference. That was in recorded history the first conference of African people or people of African descent, because there was representation there from Africa, there was representation from America, there was representation from Europe, Latin America, West Indies, and the Caribbean. It was really representative. There were about 37 delegates. He's not with me. We went for a program. So this was truly one of the very first time that, and it some historians say that it was actually the first time that the word Pan-African was used. And Sylvester Williams, W.E.B. Du Bois was there. Du Bois was actually the chair of the outcome writing committee, and he wrote a letter as as an outcome of the conference, called Letter to the Nations of the World. Letter to the Nations of the World. And that basically talked to Europeans to avoid racism, or to stand up and fight racism in their countries, and to push for decolonization within Africa. At this time, colonization was at the peak of itself, around 1900. That was the time that they were really consolidating the colonial empires. You know, in Africa. Fast forward, the second Pan African Conference, the second, which was really the first Pan African Congress. The first one was conference, and the first Congress, that was to be convened. That was that where the word Congress was used was in 1919. Um, and there were then a series of Pan African congresses until until 1945, when the Manchester Conference was called in the United Kingdom, and this was really the highlight of 21st century Pan Africanism. That brought together leaders and Pan African leaders from across the world to discuss the situation of the African people, be it in America, where racism and segregation was rife, or in Africa, where colonialism was at its peak, and where the people of Africa were beginning to, voice out and organize against the colonial rules, the colonial rulers. So at the end of this 1945 Manchester gathering, they issued a call to the African people of African descent, to rise up and fight colonialism. Um, this in history is seen as the highlight of Pan-African congresses or conferences because it had so much consequence. After that conference, we had people who were part of it now returning to their former colonies to fight against the colonialists. Kwame Nkrumah was in that conference, and um, Julius, no, Kenyatta was in that conference as well. And they left and made sure to begin the fight against colonialism. Then in 1950, um, was in jail, Kwame Nkrumah, after declaring positive action, was arrested and put in jail. But an election was organized nonetheless, and while being in jail, he won the election. So he was released to form a government, and he immediately began to prepare for uh, something that could be seen as a continuation of the Pan-African conferences, right? So he called what was called a all African um, um, he called a meeting of independent African countries. At that time, there were only 8 independent African countries, and this was in 1958. Um, later, later that year, there was then the All African People's Conference (AAPC), and this also included delegates from different parts of the continent, those that were already independent, and those that were still fighting for independence, including Algeria, and notably France Fanon. France Fanon was in that conference to represent the Algerian liberation fighters. Um, and there's an interesting story about Frantz Fanon's participation in that conference because um, it ignited a debate, about the use of violence to counter the violence of the oppressor. Then there were subsequent conferences in 1962. The All African People's Conference um, moved east, I think, to Uganda. Um, then in subsequent, it then moved to Morocco, and then notably in 1963, we had the formation of the Organization of African Unity. Now, the Organization of African Unity was a landmark formation that represented the biggest, you know, um, the biggest, I don't want to call it unification, but coming together of nation states of African descent. That was the biggest coming together of nation states of African descent. But you have to note that the formation of the Organization of African Unity was itself a watered down version of what some of the pioneers actually wanted. And the politics leading up to its formation is also quite interesting. Where there were 2 blocks. There was the Casablanca block, and there was the Monrovia bloc. The the one of the one of the blocks wanted rapid unification, and this was a bloc that was led by Kwame Nkrumah, which said that Africa must unite now or we perish. The understanding was that in our division, colonialism had triumphed. And after independence, we had been ushered into neo-colonialism. And the neo-colonialism was just a continuation of imperialism under under a different guise, giving people nominal independence whilst maintaining control over their economy and thereby effectively controlling their politics. Because if you control somebody's stomach, you definitely control what they think and say. All right. So if we remain divided, we are going to end up in the fold of the colonialists. That was the logic. Um, then the other bloc argued that there was need to hasten slowly, and this bloc was largely led by Julius Nyerere. That there was a need to hasten slowly, and that African unity must start from regional levels. So um, East Africa, West Africa, North Africa, Southern Africa, and Central Africa should start those unifying at those levels, and then we can then look at continental level later. It was a heated debate. In the end, the gradualists won the debate, and they ended up, forming the Organization of African Unity (OAU) um, as a watered down.
Just to jump in a bit, Hadi. First of all, I want to recognize the presence of Mwalimu Temi, who has joined us. Very good to have you. But something, Hadi, I wanted to intercept
Senior
is
comrade.
yes.
Senior comrade,
Is
welcome.
Yes, karibu Mwalimu. So what I want to say, Hadi, is when you take us through this journey, very interesting. I ask myself, where did that spirit amongst leaders go? Because for the conferences you've talked about, it seemed like you had a conference where everyone is there. They are passionately, debating passionately, talking about the future of Africa. But why did we lose track? What happened to that spirit along the way?
You see, the thing is that in nation building or in sort of the kind of historical push that they wanted to give Africa, the evolution of there is no, and you have to realize where we had come from. We had come from a place where our countries had been colonized and ruled by others because they wanted to control the source of certain economic resources that they needed for their own benefit. All right. And so, after granting nominal independence or after being kicked out and nominal independence was regained, um, it was still a struggle, to try and keep us where we were, where they had us. And you remember, the Cold War politics and all of that, and the need for non-alignment and all of those things. They wanted control. It was all about control. And the control was to ensure that they had us where they needed us so that they could continue to extract, those economic and material resources from our land for their own economic and industrial benefit. Right. So as we were working, as our people were working, and fighting, of course. I mean, that is part of the history. We cannot hide it. As they were working and fighting, and agreeing and disagreeing, and talking and, throwing jabs at one another, the 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 people who were, not going to allow us to have any semblance of unity, because mind you, they knew what we were about, and they knew that if we had unity, there was no way that we would be as weak as to allow them to continue to exploit us, right? And in 1965, Kwame Nkrumah wrote a book titled Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. Maybe 2 years before, he wrote Africa Must Unite. And when they were meeting in Addis Ababa in May, he distributed that book to his colleague presidents. And, a lot of diplomats have come out to say how very, what is the word, angry that book made America, the Africa Must Unite book. It made them so very mad, that he was advocating for this sort of unity, and he was not only talking about it, he was trying to work it out very concretely. Now, in 2 years later, he then wrote another book called Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. Now, neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, laid bare the operations of imperialism post-independence. And it was the last straw that broke the camel's back. And they said, we've got to get rid of this guy, And if you look at that, that book and the kind of anger that it aroused in the imperialists, you would see, why why we there was so much, opposition to that idea, because clearly you are never going to do things like this without having opposition from those who benefit from your disunity, those who benefit from your weakness. And I think that point needs to be made. Then we've had a serious, what is the word? Serious lapse in generation. In an entire generation, there has been little or no movement on Pan-African unity and Pan-Africanism. And that is a generation that we are now talking, the generation that came after the independence, the independence generation. Right. So that is where we are, where those who took over, because there were a series of coups d'etat. When Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown in 1966, between 1960 and 1969, there were more than 29 coups in Africa. This was just within one decade. So those who came after us, that whole generation, did not move the Pan-African journey very much, and that is.
So are you saying that's the point where we started getting off track? The original started all the way from 1900.
Yeah, but you see, the precedents from 1900 to there was no notion of it wasn't the notion wasn't very concrete about uniting. So like unity, I think the most forceful voice for that sort of idea was probably Marcus Garvey. Not probably, was Marcus Garvey, who came with the Africa for Africans mantra and calling on Black people to unite and and to take their destiny into their own hands. It formed the United Negro Improvement Association, and all the Black Star Line and all those other other endeavors that he made, which actually inspired a lot of other Pan-Africanists who came after us: Kwame Nkrumah, W.E.B. Du Bois, George Padmore. Mind you, George Padmore had also formed his NAACP. Sorry, W.E.B. Du Bois, and at the same time was working on an encyclopedia Africana, which he couldn't get much support for in the states, until Ghana gained independence, and Kwame Nkrumah invited him to come to Africa, to come to Ghana, and work on the encyclopedia Africana from there, gave him an office. George Padmore, and all of those, and all of those things. Now, the point about the I think we lost, the plot was lost the when the divisions began to show, Morovia and Casablanca, um, and all of those things. Then the imperialists saw an opening that they could exploit. And this is what culminated in 1963, when instead of forming a union of a union of African peoples, they then formed the Organization of African Unity, a so much watered down version of what was needed. So the gradualists, and Nyerere mentioned this in 1997 when he came to when he came to Ghana. In his speech, he mentioned it, that you know um, they had suspicions about Nkrumah's motives, and he argued forcefully with Kwame Nkrumah that what he was advocating was not practical. It was not going to happen, and that after several years, he now knows that Kwame was right, and that we, the generation, and he was speaking to the generation that was now in leadership, that they shouldn't delay African unity even 1 minute, and that without African unity, we should forget everything. So that division and that sort of watered down version of unity, then which then gave impetus to the formation of regional groupings like ECOWAS, EAC, SADC, and all of those things, then led to further balkanization and creation of further and more positions and roles, and cliques of power that people were not going to easily relinquish,
So,
for African
are you
unity.
saying, that having, regional bodies, or like, ECOWAS, EAC, SADC, are you saying those groupings frustrate Pan Africanism, the big African vision?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you see, in 1950, 1963, one of the considerations of the leaders of the newly minted nation states, one of their considerations was whether they were going to lose the little power that they had recently gained. You see, they were not looking at the bigger picture, and when you look at the 1960 constitution that Kwame Nkrumah passed in Ghana, the Article 2 mentioned specifically that the sovereignty of Ghana was not going to be surrendered under any circumstance, except in furtherance of African unity. And in furtherance of African unity, the sovereignty of Ghana could be surrendered in whole or in part, whatever the case may be. So, but some had in mind that the power that they had gained, they were not ready to lose it. And after after the meeting in Addis Ababa, um, history says that some of the presidents and prime ministers heaved a sigh of relief that they thought they were going to lose. They were going to lose. They couldn't imagine coming as presidents and leaving Addis Ababa as governors. You know, so these positions of power became a hurdle. To through African unity. Now, creation of new cliques of power, creation of the regional bodies became new layers of power, all right, that were going to take time even to mature, all right, or to gain their foot on the ground before you could even think about how to merge them. And how many years now? We're not even close to sort of that sort of merger. And because of those sort of power blocks, um, with people and with governments, and those regional blocks do not even have very high participation of the people. They are blocks of governments. All right. So you look at ECOWAS, they began talking about ECOWAS of the people um, back in the 1990s because they had realized that ECOWAS had stayed only at the state level. The presidents would go and drink tea and eat some jollof and, pass some resolutions that were never implemented. The people did not even know what ECOWAS was about. Same with EAC, which is also an EAC of states and governments, the people on the ground, SADC, and all of these regional, they are the power blocks that then rotate, power between them. So these are other layers of power. Any time that you have layers upon layers of power, you are creating obstacles because then you have people who are going to now lose their power, and with their power loss, they are losing maybe money, they are losing access to several. So when you create layers upon layers of power, um, you are delaying, or you are derailing, you know, that especially if you have those
Yeah.
layers of power occupied or captured by people who do not have any intention of leading to the ultimate goal of African unity. And those are the places where the detractors can quite very easily, very easily infiltrate and put their people at positions where they can absolutely derail the ultimate goal of African unity. So I have no compunction in saying that all these regional groupings are further balkanization of Africa, and have to some extent um, um, functioned as an opiate to sort of um, make the people or those in positions of power think that they are actually advancing Pan-Africanism, when in actual fact there is little movement.
Good. I want to know from your perspective, and I think we're going to run through this a bit faster. You've talked to us about really the history of Pan Africanism, which is quite incredible, and where we got to where we are today. But I want to ask you, from where you sit, what is the relationship of Pan Africanism with democracy and economic liberation? And I ask this because when you see young people today, let me give an example. There's demonstrations happening in Kenya right now. There's demonstrations happening in South Africa right now. And today you have an Africa where people will, there'll be an election happening in Nigeria, and Africa will pay attention. There's an election in Kenya last year. Africa paid attention, and everyone knew the runners. People even had candidates who are supporting, and Africans seem to support the politics in different countries and associate Pan-Africanism with that, right? Yet at the same time, you find that there are those Africans also who do not believe in democracy as it is, believing that it's something that is westernized and brought here, and they believe that Africans should develop their own models of governance or leadership. So, what is, in your perspective, the relationship between Pan-Africanism with democracy and the general economic liberation of the continent?
Yeah, I think there is always going to be a discussion, a disagreement, different perspective on what democracy is about, because the Western, notion of democracy, that has been sort of universalized, is something. I mean, of course, every model of governance has its flaws, but for me, I see democracy as what the people say democracy is. What do the people say democracy is? And of course, the whole gamut of issues. When we talk about governance, we are looking at how best to manage the resources of the people on their behalf, such that they are able to afford the basic necessities and develop their potentialities to the best of their ability. That is what governance is all about. That is all governance is all about. Managing the resources of the people on their behalf. Now, how you come to be in charge of managing the resources is what mostly determines what model of government that you are using. How does somebody come to be in charge, and how do the people hold you accountable for the things that you are supposed to be doing for them. Now, the Western model of democracy, and again, let me another premise that I want to put: every model of governance also comes with its economic model and comes with its social norms. Again, from a historical perspective, you find that the evolution of the African society was distorted, cut short and distorted by historical phenomena that I've already mentioned that I don't want to repeat. But the effect of that distortion is then what you see as the superimposition of economic models, and norms and governance models that did not evolve directly from the culture of the people. Because the essence of everything that we're talking about is about the development of the people. And development is nothing more or less than the positive evolution of culture. Positive evolution of culture. Now, if there is a distortion of that evolution or in the evolution of that culture, then another, culture is superimposed by historical reasons that we already all know, then there is a clash, and and the contradiction is going to take some time to heal, and that is what has kept us where we are today. For me, I think that there's a number of things that we have to think about what sort of democracy that we want. Obviously, I mean, there are things about the enjoyment of rights. There are notions about enjoyment of rights of the people. There are notions about um, expression of self, either through speech or through mobility. Um, and there are notions about people's ability, to participate in the public space. And these notions are not things that have just come about. They are things that historically, even in the African context, if you look at our ancient models of governance, we've had those things. But that is not to say that we must necessarily go back. I think the Western notions, democracy is what people say democracy is. What the Western notions have sort of succeeded in universalizing hasn't necessarily come with the kind of economic prosperity that is needed. Because as I said, every governance model goes with its economic model. And the economy is really the substructure that supports the political, social, and the other aspects of the society. So in the end, whatever model that we choose. It could be Western democracy, it could be African democracy, it could be anything that we want to call it. I don't mind. But what are the ingredients? What are the essential ingredients that our governance model or models must have in order for them to be adequate in not only delivering the enjoyment of rights, inalienable rights, but also in delivering economic prosperity to the people. I think it is necessary for us to think about the fundamental principles rather than the labels. All right, so that with the
Yeah.
fundamental principles, whatever we end up calling them, we will be able to still be within range. But there is no doubt, let me just say this before I conclude, there's absolutely no doubt that what we call or know today as democratic governance or as democracy or whatever it is, um his economic model has absolutely failed. It has enabled, it has enabled in a very large measure the continuous plunder of African resources. And that is not to say that the notions, the ideals of human rights and things like that are not good for Africans. They are good for Africans. We had those things. We fought for them. Okay? But in a hypocritical world where some of those things are used uh, as conduits, you know, to continue to plunder our resources, we have to rethink our own ways of implementing perhaps those things within the context of Pan-African unity. And the only answer uh, in safeguarding democracy, whether it be African democracy a European democracy, America, whatever democracy it is that we want, or whatever model of governance that we want to adopt. The only answer in safeguarding that sort of governance is through African unity, because that is what gives us the strength to be able deter to deter any form of aggression against us for reasons that we do not serve the interests of others. So African unity is an absolute must in terms of whatever. But I think these are existential questions that will continue to engage our minds. And I am very confident that this generation will come out with something suitable, or tweak whatever models that we are already we're using, um, in a way that favors us, so that we can, be able to develop ourselves the way we ought to.
Talking about this generation, Hadi, most young people today are, are being hit hard by the economic conditions across, different African countries. Now, I speak for a young person that they're trying to do business, they're trying to find a job, and I think one of the interactions I had, as I was preparing for this space, taking different views of what people feel about Pan Africanism, a young person asks themselves, Pan Africanism seems to be more about politics and Africans uniting, but what economic liberation or economic prosperity lies within what economic prosperity or liberation hope lies within Pan Africanism, that a young person somewhere in the corner of Africa struggling, to make ends meet, struggling to find a job or struggling to push their business, you know, what's that hope within Pan-Africanism that answers their economic challenges that should make them want to be Pan-African? What hope lies within Pan-Africanism for that young person?
You see, why? I think there's some fundamental questions that need to be asked. Why do we have all the resources that make great nations great, and yet we are hungry? Our people are hungry. Our people are poor. In the abundance of water, we are thirsty. Um, let's ask ourselves this question, okay? And it is always necessary for us to be able to analyze these issues within systems, all right? So whatever happens in the political sphere affects what happens in the economic sphere. And that is why Kwame Nkrumah said that everything economic is political and everything political is military. Meaning, your politics must be to safeguard your economy, all right? And your economic, or your military must be to safeguard both your politics and your economics. Okay. The reason why we are here exploited, our resources are benefiting others rather than us, is because we are weak. It's because we are weak. We don't have enough to cater for our people. The reason there is hunger is because we don't have enough to cater for our people. All right. Now we have we have the resources to be able to turn things around. But those resources, you can't, the oil is there, but if you don't have access to the oil, the gold is there, but if you don't have access to the gold, if you look at the ownership, Look at the biggest producers of gold in the world. Ghana, number one, South Africa, and all of that. And then go behind and look at who owns the companies that mine the gold. All right. And go and look at the countries that those companies who own these right, the countries that own the countries where these companies are based, and you would see the amount of transformation that our gold has caused in those countries. Um, in those countries. All right. So this is basically the idea of Pan-Africanism, that that we need to take control of our own resources. And the only way you can take control of your resources is if you are strong enough, because these powers are not going to let you be. And that is why you have all these military bases around, because you are weak and you can easily be threatened to give things up. And if you dare to move in ways that shows that you are threatening their interests, they'll take you out. And typical example is Libya. You can spend your time to make your country good, and citizens, one day they just get up and they decide to take you out, and they take you out and make your country unlivable. you know um yeah, so you've got to amass the sort of strength that is needed, not only to defend yourself, but to be able to deter others from thinking that they can be aggressive towards you when you act in your interest, which may not necessarily be in their interest. So the economic argument is very sound, that in the end, the only way we can have the strength to ward off these predators and take the destiny and control of our own resources is to have the strength to do that. And the only way we can have that strength is to unite.
Good. Thank you, Hardi. Talk to us about um, what a borderless Africa means, and what the Borderless Africa campaign that African Rising is pushing really is all about. What's the vision like?
Right. So the Borderless Africa is a Pan-African campaign. Um, it's about pushing for people to be able to move freely across Africa. Um, um, it's very funny when we did the All Africa Movements Assembly in Arusha, Tanzania. One of my colleagues was coming with three kids, and one of the kids had American passport, and two had Senegalese passport. The one with American passport could very easily enter Tanzania. The two with Senegalese passport could not, you know. And we went through hell to get them visas to enter Tanzania. And this is a live reality. I mean, if you were walking to the border uh, from Nigeria to Cameroon, or something like that, with somebody with an American or a European, that European would be allowed entry, and you would have to produce, massive amounts of documents and give explanations before. The bottom line is that Africans don't have access to their own continent. We cannot move around, and that is why we cannot trade amongst ourselves. If you look at our African external trade, only 15% of intra-African trade. All If you take all our trade, only 15% of it is retained in Africa. 85% is 85% is traded with either Europe or America, and Asia. You know, so
So, so
that has its own effects, and things like so. The Borderless Africa campaign is a campaign to push for free movement of Africans within Africa, abolishment of visas, removal of border restrictions, allow Africans to move. That is the message of the Borderless Africa campaign.
so if I've got you right, Hadi, it's the campaign is all about removal of visas, easing movement of Africans across Africa, but it's not necessarily about removal of borders amongst African countries. Is that correct?
No, we are not asking African countries to remove borders within 1 or 2 years. Um, at least that's not the message of the Borderless Africa campaign. That will be the ideal Pan African, vision that we would all want. But I think it's a matter of trying to take things one step at a time, to be able to move things. Once people are able to move across borders freely and without any restrictions, the borders themselves become superfluous, and and we can move faster towards the vision. But for now, the practicality of the movement of people to be able to trade amongst themselves and to just have access um, through self expression and mobility is the cornerstone of the campaign.
Good. I think I'll share an experience. Recently, I was crossing into Tanzania with some Kenyan friends. But the irony is, actually, this is the EAC, and in Tanzania, you have Arusha, which is considered the capital city of the EAC. But you imagine when we reached the border with the Kenyan friends I'd come with, we were asked so many questions of what we're going to do in Tanzania. And usually, Tanzania gives it 90 days as an East African within the country, but they ended up giving us just 30 days, And you wonder, because the EAC is out there talking about, ease of goods and services and people, but just Tanzania, which is so close to Uganda and Kenya, you can't get in. Some people are even turned back. I have Kenyan friends and Ugandan friends, even Rwandan sometimes, who have been turned back at the border of Namanga. So it's really frustrating, especially if you're talking about unity. But the question I would ask is, how can someone, a young African, join or be part of this Borderless Africa campaign that's being run by Africans Rising? What's the process like, and how
Yeah,
does one contribute to the entire campaign?
yeah. The borders are annoying. To be honest with you, and some of the questions that you face at the borders or at the visa counters in different countries, they are really annoying, and they speak to all this history that we've been talking about. um I have no doubt that we definitely have the will and the passion to see to the removal of the borders. um the free movement of people is a great step towards that decolonized future. To be part of it, it's very simple to be part of the campaign. There are different levers. First one is the people's petition. Um, you sign a people's petition. It's the link is bit.ly/borderless petition. in one word.
Maybe you could write that link for us in the comment section. That would be great after the space.
Yeah, yeah. So exactly. Once you do that, you sign the petition, then you share it with others. Then you can after sharing on social media, we've created different levels of what do you call customizable template posters that you can use to advertise yourself as a supporter of the Borderless-Africa. Then you create it and then you share it to popularize it. Then we are, apart from the online, we are also deploying volunteers on the ground. Right now we have about 200 in who have registered in more than 30 countries, African countries. We want to cover the whole continent, where people would print the petition in hard copy and move from shop to shop, market to market, salon to salon, to speak to people about Borderless Africa and get them to sign on the papers. So you can also join as a volunteer to do that. We are going to be organizing on ground to do mass actions, peaceful marches and demonstrations for Borderless Africa in different African countries for African Liberation Week. You can also join that action, and you can also donate to the campaign. I mean, we very much wish for this to be an Africa-funded campaign, because this is something that we have to do for ourselves.
Yeah.
So whatever little that you have, you can also donate to it. So these are ways by which one can participate in the campaign.
Good. When is the week for the Africa Week? When is that going to happen?
That is the week of 25th May. Week of 25th May.
Okay. When I was talking to friends about Borderless Africa and these campaigns about Pan-Africanism that happen, the people from the diaspora feel like they feel like they're not as much part. And even when they come to Africa, someone was telling me that they came to Africa feeling and thinking that Africa, this is a black American friend of mine. She came to Africa thinking that in Africa she would feel like she belongs, she would feel like she's part. But she says that when you come here and people hear you speaking with an accent, they then quickly make you feel like you will never truly belong, however much you try to learn the local language. So, and they say that even with these campaigns and different initiatives that come up, they feel like they never really get involved. My question to you was, the leader at Africans Rising, what have you done, and what's up? What are you doing to include the Africans in the diaspora, and what contribution do they make or can they make to the different initiatives or campaigns that are being pushed for a better Africa?
Well, I think there are many historical reasons for which some of our people here find it difficult to to think beyond and assimilate the fact that our people in the diaspora are our people, because this long years of brainwashing and lack of solidarity education and lack of political education has had its toll on people's minds, and it will take time but we have to continue. So at Africans Rising, diaspora is a key part of our programming, and indeed, diaspora is we consider diaspora as a sixth region of Africa. So in all our programming, we had diaspora. Indeed, at the launch of the People's Petition for Borderless-Africa, we had diaspora input um, um, in terms of the speeches. One of the pillars of the Borderless-Africa campaign is for the mass rollout of the African passport, including making it available to people in the diaspora, who wish to acquire African citizenship, be given that passport and allowed to move across Africa freely. So this is an integral part of the campaign, and yeah, diaspora is a crucial part of this. Any Pan-Africanism that doesn't consider diaspora as part of that doesn't really understand what Pan-Africanism is. Because if you look at the history that I've narrated, a lot of the efforts that culminated in what we call Pan-Africanism today, a lot of it actually, were either started or had great input from people in the diaspora. So we cannot discount that aspect of our family.
Good. Good. I think as we get to the conclusion, you talked about the campaign and a couple of things we have talked about before, but you realize that we still don't control the financing of even our banks. Most countries, you find that the banks are foreign-owned banks, and even when you look at most NGOs, most organizations, most initiatives, they are funded by foreign, organizations or foreigners. How is Africa going to realize unity when we don't control our finance, we don't control our funding? Locally, you realize that we don't fund or contribute, even those that have money, we don't largely contribute or fund our initiatives. How do you see us working that out and really realizing unity if we can't or we don't yet control our finance and funding of our initiatives?
I think it's a chicken and egg situation, but we have to note that when we talk about control of our resources or our banks or our money, we're talking economics. But everything economic is political. Once again, repeating and quoting Kwame Nkrumah, everything economics is political. So one of the mistakes that some Pan-Africanists have made is to look at trade integration and economic integration and put it over and above political unification. But that is like putting the cart before the horse. You are going to be in a situation where the sort of political decisions that are needed to anchor the economic integration are not going to be able to be made because you don't have the political infrastructure in place, to make those policy decisions, and that is why even some of the integrational economic institutions that we have, um, uh, ECA, AFDB, Afrexim, and all of that have massive shares held by Europeans. Because some of we do not have, the AU doesn't have the political authority to make any binding decisions on member countries. It's a voluntary organization, and countries can leave and enter as they wish. So it is to achieve political unification that must be our topmost priority. And in doing that, I do not discount the fact that we need to pay attention to the even the caliber of people that would end up or emerge as people who will be in positions of power in this new politically unified Africa. And it is work that has to be done. But we have to, right that wrong and dispel that conception that somehow you can achieve economic unification without without some form of political unification. And that example is right before us in Europe, when they after so many years of fighting amongst themselves, they decided to form the European Union. And just did away with the borders and allowed free movement and all of that. At some point, had to begin to create political institutions. And some of now there are people who call themselves European federalists who are championing for Europe to become a federal, entity, just like the United States of America, which has 50 states forming the union. Everything economic is political, and everything political is military. And so we have to understand that this talk about political integration, which is the sort of ideology that has brought about the fact that you have the two protocols adopted at the same time, the protocol on the African Continental Free Trade Area and the protocol on free movement of people. And the protocol on AFCFTA has more ratifications and, in fact, has come into force, whilst the protocol on free movement of persons is still lagging behind with only 4 ratifications, 4 years, 4 years on. That is the idea. But people are the ones who move goods. So how do you say goods should move, but people should not move? So doing things upside down will not. So we have to prioritize political unification, and work at making sure that with that sort of political model of unification, we are able to control. In the meantime,
Okay.
with free movement and all of those things, we can really accelerate exchange of labor, exchange of services and goods, and especially with the advent of technology, we can leverage these modern tools to also be able to, create some control of our resources for ourselves whilst working for ultimate unification.
Okay. Asante, thank you for that, Hadi. I think as we conclude,
Yeah.
um,
How much
you know,
longer do we have?
I think we're concluding now. But my question to you, of course, the young Pan Africans also look up to you. Just a few personal questions. Who's your biggest Pan African icon, and what's your biggest Pan African quote, or a quote in regards to African unity that pushes you or keeps you pushing as a Pan African?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier in the discussion that I'm a student of Kwame Nkrumah. Um, I think, yeah, Nkrumah himself, said that the the person who affected him the most was Marcus Garvey. People have different reasons for choosing different um, people as their role models. Doesn't mean those people don't have any faults or they didn't do anything wrong in their lifetime. And it doesn't mean that those who choose them as their heroes don't know that those people also had faults. It just means that they are able to sift through what the person has done and be able to learn something that can guide their own lives. towards a vision that they want to achieve. It also doesn't mean there are not other people that we read. I read Nyerere, I read Marcus Garvey, Philosophies and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. It's one of my favorite books. Some of the speeches, some of the volumes containing his speeches. I read Martin Luther King Jr., I read Malcolm X, I read George Padmore, W.E.B. Du Bois. I read Steve Biko, yeah, and all of these others. But because I'm allowed to choose who is the principal person to have affected my Pan-African growth. I'm principally Kwame Nkrumah's student of Kwame Nkrumah. I think the quote that resonates with me is from when he said that Africa must unite. We unite or we perish. Africa must unite. We unite or we perish. And that is really what is going on now. You can see everybody coming. Africa, they want to woo us. We are not in the game. In fact, we are the game. We are the game. We are not in the game that they are playing. We are the game that is being played. And we are perishing if we don't see it. Because when you are moving to a point where everybody wants to come and take what belongs to you and then turn you into beggars or turn yourself, you are perishing. You are perishing. There will be a day when all the begging you will do will not give you food to eat. And your existence, your very existence would no longer be guaranteed.
Okay. Okay. Good. That's good. That's good, Hadi. Now the very last question, and we conclude. Where do we move from here? What for a young African that really want to see a better Africa? How do we move from here? What advice do you give about how we can move from here? What should we do? What should we look out for at an individual level? What do you tell? What's your message to the young people that believe in a better Africa, that want to contribute to a better Africa? What should they do, and how should they go around it?
Read about African history. And when I say African history, I mean all the way from ancient Africa. Read about the empires of Mali, Songhai, Nubia, Kemet, all those. Read about the political theories that have come for liberation of Africa. Practice Pan-Africanism. And practicing Pan-Africanism means you must see your fellow Africans as your brothers and sisters. You must see. So for me, in default, I see everybody of African descent as my brother or my sister until they say or prove otherwise. This is my Pan-African philosophy or principle. Every African or person of African descent is my brother or my sister until they say or prove otherwise. I think at individual level, that is a way that you can practice Pan-Africanism. Purchase African goods. When you have the alternative, always prioritize African goods. Because when you're buying African, you're contributing to African economy. yeah, practice your culture. Don't lose your culture. Some people, there's this notion that some people think that once you begin to think Pan-African, continental, then it means that you are erasing the cultures at the community level. This is false. I don't lose any opportunity to speak my local language, participate in festivals, and no, you can. In fact, participate in all this and still be a Pan-African. In fact, those are the things that complete your African identity, and therefore, um, you know, help you to navigate the world as a Pan-Africanist. Yeah, and keep the faith. Keep the faith. The only thing that keeps a revolutionary alive is his faith. Hmm? Because sometimes the statistics can be against you. The odds would be against you. The whatever, the evidence, the data, everything will be stacked against you. But you still believe that you will get there, and eventually you do.
Good. That's really powerful. Uh, what should young Africans movement, part of different movements, people under Africans Rising, what should they expect from Africans Rising? In the next 10 years moving forward, and what do we see? The borderless campaign. What do we see Pan Africanism in the next 10 years too? What should we expect?
Well, I think I would say we shouldn't expect. I would say we should get involved and and do what ought to be done, because somebody has to do the work. And um, yeah, whatever we expect ideas, certain ideas to come into fruition. Let's get involved and work on those ideas to come to fruition. Yeah, the best way to get it done is to do it yourself. Yeah.
Great. I think the big message there is let's get involved. It's been a great evening. Thank you so much, Comrade Hardy, for creating the time. If you joined the conversation late, this is a recorded space, so you can catch it here on Twitter, or the link will be on for YouTube. You can also catch it there. Hadi, we thank you for your efforts that you're doing at Africans Rising, but also in the different initiatives that you're part of. You're inspiring so many young people to believe in a better Africa, an Africa that works for us. And seeing people like you and the work you do, the dedication you put in, the time, really, reminds us that there is hope for Africa, and it challenges us to also really do get involved and do something for Africa in our different capacities. So, keep pushing. We are grateful for you. We believe in you, and we believe that a better Africa will come when we get involved, like you've said. Um, Thank you for everyone that has stayed with us till now. Malimo, thank you so much, and everyone that has been with us till this time. We do this every Thursday. We did this on Friday because we couldn't do the
Thank you,
space yesterday.
Fred.
We have these conversations that are shaping the future of
Are
East
you
Africa and Africa. Can you
you
hear
don't
me,
want
Adi?
to hear the voice of senior comrade Mutemi?
Let me try to invite him to speak. He could share one or two things.
A word
I'd
or two
invited him
before we
earlier,
leave,
but
yes.
I
Or
don't know if
maybe
he saw
he's
my
engaged.
invite. I tried
Mm,
to invite him to speak, but I don't know if he saw my invite. He's not
okay.
responding yet.
Sometimes the senior comrades just want to
Mm,
listen. Yeah, that's
true,
also fine. No, thank you very
true,
much
true.
for this conversation. I'm very grateful. I've been on the road, so I don't know all the people who have joined. But thanks everyone for the time, and let's keep in touch. I'll share my my handle in the chat. We can keep in touch. Anything Pan Africanist, please tag me. Um, and let's do this. Nobody will come and liberate Africa for us. Africa is ours to liberate. Africa is ours to make. Let's
Good,
make.
good. Asante sana. Have a good night. And yeah, thank you
You too.
everyone. Hope to have you guys on another conversation next week. And yeah, listen in
Okay.
if you missed the earlier conversation. It was really, really deep and interesting. Asante sana,
Thank you.
Hadi. Hope we shall have something like this
Asante.
next time. So have a good
All right.
night. Good night, everyone.
You too, my
Joel,
brother.
Jay, Voda, and everyone that's still on. Have a wonderful night, and let's keep pushing for better Africa. Let us get involved. Good night.